The 2025 International Colloquium Series Europe is sponsored by Union Theological Seminary in the City of New York, the Episcopal Diocese of California, King's College London, Regent's Park College, University of Oxford, the Center for Black Theology at Regent's Park College, Oxford, the Protestant Theological Institute of Paris, and in partnership with the Cathedral Church of the Holy Trinity, the American Cathedral in Paris.
The Northern California Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Foundation is dedicated to promoting justice, health, education, and service. Please consider making a donation at NorcalMLKFoundation.org. Every donation makes a difference.
So before I invite our second speaker, that's Dr. Grizzell, so you can get yourself ready, Aaron. Just a couple of apologies. Firstly, we've had some difficulty with the sound, particularly for those who are joining us remotely. I think we've kind of solved that now, so hopefully that will be helpful. In the future, those of you asking questions, if you could stand up and actually use your preacher's voice, when you're asking a question, obviously not preach a sermon, but certainly use the voice to project it, so that those who are joining us remotely can hear. The owl kind of picks up quite a lot of sound, but it's not a perfect system, so those of you who are speaking from the audience, so to speak, you could kind of raise your voice. And then thirdly, thankfully, I think Aaron is recording this, which is just as well, because I did kind of record it and paused it and then didn't press play again. So hopefully the later bits will be recorded on here, but there will be a recording that will come via Aaron Grizzell. So thanks, well done Aaron, for sparing my blushes. Our second speaker is Dr. Aaron Grizzell, who is the Executive Director of the Northern California Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Foundation, based in San Francisco in California. Originally founded by the late Curtis Scott King, he's a co-founder of the foundation's King and Faith series that engages scholarly and faith communities in contemporary contemplation of Dr. King's message and legacy. Dr. Grizzell is a historian of religion whose work includes historical and philosophical examination of Dr. King, Harold Thurman, and Mahendras K. Gandhi. As a member of the American Academy of Religion and co-founder of the Black Religion and Black Theology Unit of the AAR's Western Region. As a member of the planning committee of the AAR Theologies of Martin Luther King Jr. Unit. I first met Aaron, I think, in 2017, I think. I was invited to San Francisco to go and spend a few days with him, and we had a fantastic time. What he did not tell me is how hilly is San Francisco. And as you can tell, I'm not built for walking up big hills. Anyway, I've since forgiven him that. So, Dr. Aaron Grizzell, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reddy, my dear friend, Anthony, and to all of you. It is a deep and abiding pleasure to be here at Regent's Park College with you all at the University of Oxford. Now, a few housekeeping notes. My best friend in the world is sitting right to my left here, Dr. Henry Evans, who is Dean, College of Arts and Sciences at Washington State University. And he decided to fanboy me and to be here. But my goddaughter and Henry and Kelly Green Evans' daughter is a Rhodes Scholar right up the road here at St. Anthony's College, and they decided to visit their daughter and to, well, they decided to say they were visiting the daughter, but they came. I appreciate that. Love you very much. My assignment this morning is to talk a bit about the forerunners of Black theology, touching on the role of concrete human connection, the spirit, and lived experience as intrinsic traits and values that make up the insides of Black theology. And there are two personages that I want to just briefly discuss in that regard. Dr. Hopkins talked about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and some of the work that he was doing that sort of led into the thought of building sort of a Black theology of liberation as a formalized framework. But one of his mentors, I can say, is one of the 20th century's great American theologians, creative theologian, Howard Washington Thurman. Howard Thurman was one of the first theologians in America to go visit Mohandas K. Gandhi there in India and to discuss the efforts in the United States. And Howard Thurman was one of those who other theologians looked to think how we should think about this time. 1949, his book, Jesus and the Disinherited, was one of the major books. It's still a major book today for many theologians, and Dr. King used to keep that book in his inside pocket wherever he was, because the question was, what does one do when your back is against the wall? What does one do when your back is against the wall? It's one of those abiding questions that Dr. King kept forefront in his mind. So I want to talk a little bit to begin about this, the primordium. What was the milieu that brought about this whole idea of Black theology? And it came not from the shores of the United States in the beginning, but it came from the shores of West Africa before the formation of this relation was part of modernity's meaning, the Middle Passage experience. In discussing how radical critical thought could use religion and the language and understandings of the Enlightenment and modernity as a portal to exploring authentic expressions of non-Western peoples and pursuing the structure of the universal in the human world, historian of religions Charles H. Long perceived a structure for the universal in the human world that, though created for Enlightenment understandings of the human venture, expressed an opening for the authentic expression of others. Religion thus became the locus for a meaning that carried an archaic form. It was a root meaning and could thus become the basis for radical critical thought. Henri Baudet, in positing the formative elements of Western culture that predicated thought, highlighted the dialectical appetite in Western culture in the formation of the symbol as a coherence of ambivalous elements. He states, two relations, separate but indivisible, are always apparent in the European consciousness. One is the realm of political life in its broadest sense, in the atmosphere of concrete relations with concrete non-European countries, peoples, and worlds. The other relationship has reigned in the minds of men Its domain is that of the imagination, of all sorts of images of non-Western peoples and worlds which have flourished in our cultures, images derived not from observation, experience, and perceptible realities, but from a psychological urge. That urge creates its own realities that are totally different from the political realities of the first category, but they are in no way subordinate in either strength or clarity, since they have always possessed that absolute reality value so characteristic of the rule of myth. Now, Long notes that this historical background forms a passive scaffolding of thought regarding the power of Western modernity and its notion of civilization. It also provides a context for our understanding of the West's universalizing mission. Now, I begin with the above context because religion is implicated in the modern project, wherein the emergence of thought occurs within the context of one's situation. And from this vantage, all communities had, have, and will have its passive and critical moments. Thus, in this sense, religion takes on the meaning of emplacement, of how one comes to terms with the ultimate significance of one's place in the world. For a people, this translates structurally not just as thought, but also as experience, behaviors, intentions, and culture, because thought is not religion's first indication. Thought is not religion's first indication. Religion is indicated in the privations of the concrete formation that gives rise to thought. It is indicated in that which is emitted out of these concrete formations. Thus, these emissions or spirit too serve to give rise to thought. So these concrete formations, culture, and the spirit that is emitted out of these concrete relationships also give rise to thought. We can therefore locate 3 points that serve as propaedeutics for the understanding of Black theology's primordial appearance. Within the experience, behaviors, intentions, and culture that were cast through the tensions of the Middle Passage and through enslavement, we can locate the substance from which Black theology was formed. And these concrete phenomena, taken together, emit a spirit from which Black theology finds an anchor. The lived experience from which the concrete formations and emissions are manifested provide the locus that binds Black theology to Western modernity's own making. These brief remarks then will offer, so I'm gonna stop right here. So I am a preacher, and preachers in America in the Black church have 4 closings. So you just noticed this is my second closing. These brief remarks will offer a peek into the primordial appearance of Black theology, taking as its progenitors 2 of the 20th century's creative thinkers and theologians, Howard Thurman and Martin Luther King Jr. Howard Thurman may be best known as a mentor to King, but in his own right, he possessed a reservoir of scholarship and a corpus of thought that continues to influence succeeding generations of thinkers, ranging from civil rights activists to religious and interreligious minds and philosophers. His life and works span 8 decades. So he was born in 1899, died in 1981. So he spanned 8 decades, or almost 9 decades of the 20th century. Dr. King, of course, as we should all know, of course, that 1964 Nobel Peace Prize winner. He's the most known civil rights activist. I'm honored to serve as the executive director of a foundation that his wife founded in San Francisco, California, for nearly 2 decades now. And he is one of 3 persons in the United States that have a holiday named after him, right? So it's Dr. King, and then it's George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. It's interesting that they merged George Washington's and Abraham Lincoln's holiday to make one holiday and still have Dr. King out here with his own holiday, which is pretty cool. But here is King's thought. So both of these, Howard Thurman and Dr. King, their formation and their theology was not formed out of a Christian framework. It was formed out of the concrete connection with family and with nature. Here's what King says about God when he was in graduate school. It's quite easy for me to think of a God of love, mainly because I grew up in a family where love was central and where lovely relationships were ever present. It is quite easy for me to think of the universe as basically friendly, mainly because of my uplifting hereditary and environmental circumstances. It is quite easy for me to lean toward optimism than pessimism about human nature, mainly because of my childhood experience. Now note, King is talking about all of this healthy relationship and healthy growth that he was a part of as a young child in a place in America where white people didn't even care about him. He lived in an entirely different universe. Howard Thurman stated as such in Daytona, Florida, where he was raised. He said that, white people were in a whole other planet. My grandmother worked for him, my mother worked for him, but they were in a whole other planet. So within this derogating environment, there was health, there was love, there was optimism, and there was growth. These concrete relationships between people are what bound and what continues to bind the African American community and the diasporic community together. So when we talk about Black theology, we are talking about a framework that began or that finds its moorings on the coast of West Africa, where people were taken, forebears were taken from their land. So they were taken from their families, taken from their land, walked to the coast, put in a dungeon, stripped naked, put on a boat, name changed, didn't know where they were going, terra incognita, sat in purpose-built ships that the Parliament of Great Britain created in 81. Created ships. They approved purpose-built ships for slaving. 12-inch by 18-inch by 6 feet for people to be slotted in for up to 90 days. Stripped up your name, stripped up your land, didn't know where you were going, didn't have any way to think about who one was. This was the epitome of absence. It was the epitome of absence. It was an involuntary absence that every person on that ship, on all of those ships, that had to experience for themselves, involuntarily. That individual dealing with not loss, but an absence. It was nothing there. Having to find themselves again. That's one data point in the modern journey of the Atlantic world, which is a modern development. That's one, that's the individual side. The social side has to do with the fact that everyone on that ship had to go through that. So that it is a data point, it is a social data point. It means that all of those forebears who came can relate to the same issue, to the same experience. That's why folks in America, African Americans in America, black people in the United States can relate to black people in Brazil. Because of that one experience. Our friend Rachel Harding, religious scholar, she's an expert in condom play. She's at the University of Colorado at Boulder. What she did is she took a cassette tape down to Brazil and played it for her condom play friends, right? She played the tape of a Sunday morning sermon. When she played that tape, her friends in Brazil shot up and said, "This sounds just like what we do on Sunday morning. Sounds exactly like what we do." A relational aspect that we can already, from this primordial, and it's from that grounding, from the concrete experience of loss, of absence, and recapturing of the self, that we find the birth of black religion and black theology. It is a strength. It is not a pathology, it is a strength where one has been confronted with sheer absence and have had to find a way to capture and recapture themselves again. And upon recapturing themselves, to be able to relate to others in a very oppressive environment, to be able to live and continue to live and continue to thrive. So we find a strength in black liberation theology that says, yes, black is beautiful. Yes, our God is a liberating God. And because of it, we can relate to all of those in the world who need and who are experiencing oppression and who need their own liberating thought and force. It's a global thought, but that thought comes through an experience of sheer and utter absence. And it provides for us a way to think about how black religion and black theology and black liberation theology was formed and continues today. Thank you so much.
Stay there for a moment. Okay, so any questions, please stand and raise your voice. If you have a question for Aaron, please.
Thank you very much, Pastor Aaron. I'd like to learn more from you about the influence that Gandhiji had on Thurman. Was it just to do with non-violence? Was it to do with, as you say, family, nature? Was it to do with politics? Was it to do with God?
Great question. Oh my God, so two things. Thurman went over to South Asia with 3 other people, his wife, Sue Bailey Thurman, and then his colleague, who was a minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And there were 2 couples. When they went to meet Gandhi, the question that Gandhi had, one of the questions that Gandhi had, is he wanted to know about what was going on in America. At that time, in 1936, Howard Thurman was looked at. He was then the dean of chapel at Howard University. He was beginning to be looked at as that person who ended up, whose role ended up being taken up, not by his own devices, by Martin Luther King. Howard Thurman was positioned in a way to where he was being looked at as the one to help to usher in a new movement for for liberation for not only black people, but those who were oppressed. So Gandhi had a lot of Thurman went there to talk to the Mahatma about his particular work. The Mahatma wanted to understand whether or not that work could occur in the U.S. Spurred by the black population. Here's the thing. The United States was the only place where black people and people who were oppressed, well, the Atlantic world in general, but the United States in particular, where black people only made up 10% of the population. So if we were going to go to war against the establishment armed, it's 10-1, right? So it was a different type of test, right? In India, it was colonialism. In the land, in the U.S., black people were taken, and they were one of the 3 people that de Tocqueville talked about. There is the Native American, there is the white, and there is the black. 3 people that make up the land in America. Black people only made up 10%. So there had to be a different type of framing and strategy there, and that's what the Mahatma was talking to Thurman about. But what he wanted to know, what he really wanted is he wanted Sue Bailey Thurman to sing some spirituals to him. And that's where he really landed. He wanted he wanted to hear the spirituals because the Fisk Jubilee singers at Fisk University, who started the entire sort of spirituals in the 19th century, late 19th, he wanted to hear Sue Bailey Thurman sing. And that, he was there, I think they were there 3 hours. And it was that, but can this test work in America because if it can work in America, then it can work anywhere in the world. That was part of his thought, and that was part of the thought of Thurman. Thurman did not want to be that person. He was not a leadership man in that sense. He wasn't what they called back in that day a race man. He wasn't that type of man. He didn't want to do that. He had another thing in mind, and so he wrestled with that the rest of his life.
Okay, so we have a question that is remote. So can you speak a comment on the difference, if any, of the experiences of slavery for the Atlantic Passage and that of Africa?
Great question. Great question. Part of so part of the pulling of people from Africa to this new space was to create a new labor force that could serve as you know, the forced labor for creating these commodities for for our new modern world. So they were in a different land and taken away from the land that they were to this new space that they were charged with cultivating for the riches of Europe. Remember, when Europe came over, it was terra incognita. It could have been, this was a whole other planet going across the Atlantic. They didn't even know it existed. I mean, Christopher Columbus thought he was in East India. That's why he didn't know anything, right? This was a whole new situation. They came over on the shores or in our African lands. Those lands were peopled by, they were the people there. So it was a military framing that their land was cut up for use similar to the U.S. But again, it was peopled by our forebears. So I mean, even in South Africa or whatever, or all of the other countries, it was peopled by our forebears. So it was less of them, more of our forebears on the land. Here, we were brought over, it was only, in the United States, it was only 10%. You know? So it was a slightly different framing in terms of how that, and there's some nuance in that I'd love to get into. I talk too long, so it'll take me too long to answer the way that I want to answer. But it's sort of, the land is important, and the peopling of the land is important at the end of the day.
We've still got time for one more question. Another question, anyone?
Is that okay? Yeah, no, thank you. So this invitation just to reflect a bit on the kind of the tension, and just as an outside observer, kind of goes at the heart of how one might tell a story of Black religious experience. So Professor Hopkins gave one which centres the question of scripture, church, responses to revelation. I hear you giving a more kind of Charles Long-ish kind of a narration of kind of universal experience, so we can connect kind of North American Black church experience to NorcalMLK Grizzell. There's an underlying unity there. Can you just narrate for us a little bit how you, because that can sometimes be read as a tensional relationship between those two kinds of accounts. One can read them in more synthetic ways. So just kind of, it'd be helpful to hear how you see the relationship between the account you've given and the first account, and give some frameworks for thinking about those two quite different but complementary or dialectical kinds of accounts.
Thank you for that. So Charles Long was my teacher. I was his last student before he died, and Raymond Carr was the second to last. So Ray is the president of the Society for the Study of Black Religion that was co-founded by Charles Long, but he's also the curator and director of the Charles H. Long papers. So he holds all the papers of Charles. So I'm a historian of religions after Dr. Long. You know, Luke, about some of Long's work. So Charles Long was not a theologian. His framing and mine, I hope in this very crude way, had to do with religion as a that's not theology. Religion for Long was orientation, how one sees themselves placed in the world, right? That's sort of Long's framing for what religion is. Theology for him had to do was religion, but religion was more than just theology, because you had all types of religious permutations. Remember, his thing had to do with the creation and myth stories in and around the world, and what is it that links these, or what is it that is connecting these myth stories, and what can we say about them that brings the human condition together, right? Right. What are the data points that can be touched on in all of these myth stories that can bring the human framework together? And that for him was religion, right? Those data points that could bind those data points for him, that's what orientation is. Theology for us in America is a part of that, right? That's where he wasn't an essentialist or anything like that in his academic work. It was religion as religion. And so the tension, and there is the tension between religion and theology has to do with, and Raymond can speak, and Andrea White can speak better to this. It has to do with some with an essentialism, that is, and particularly in the African American context, which is fraught and awful. I can say it that way without.
Thank you. I think we are done. Thank you very much, Evan.
The International Colloquium Series, confronting global issues with moral clarity and intellectual depth.